Ladies and gentlemen, let us see who I'm about to talk. This person reminds us that language is not just a medium of communication, it's an entire ecosystem that needs strategy, sustainability, and long-term vision. Please welcome Mr. Karthick Narayanan, a researcher whose work spans language documentation and community-led archiving in India. His research draws from extensive fieldwork among the Toda and Kota communities, challenging dominant model of language vitality and displacement. In corporate term, he doesn't just manage data, he preserves intellectual capital that can never be replaced. From designing linguistic archives to developing NLP, I'm sorry, I think I'm a little starstruck by the panel, NLP data sets, he proves that even AI needs cultural sensitivity training. Let's welcome a professional who shows us that language thrives, community scales sustainably. Please, can we have a huge round of applause for Mr. Karthick Narayanan?
Yeah, I'm going to introduce you. Yeah, there's one. Okay, so thank you very much to the HLF organizers, to Giridhar, for giving me this wonderful opportunity to have a conversation with Peggy. So before we start the conversation, let me introduce Peggy. So Peggy is a linguist who comes into the field of linguistics with a very different perspective on language from her own lived experience as a speaker of a Bhojpuri language, or what was called now a heritage language spoken in the Trinidad and Tobago region. Her experience of speaking not just Bhojpuri but also the Caribbean Creole informs a lot of her works, especially the two of her recent works, Wanderers, Kings and Merchants, and Father Tongue and Motherland. Now, she is a linguist, she has taught at Harvard, she has taught at Jawaharlal University, where I also did my PhD. She has not been a faculty when I did my PhD, but yeah, but she has been a well-known figure in the department. And she continues to teach in Ashoka University today, where music and communication, you teach both, right? Language, communication.
Basically, how do you look, is this on?
Yeah.
It says on. Yeah. No, how do you locate a critter like me? And they don't have a specific linguistics department. So either the arts department or the anthropology, they find a place when they can.
Yes. So there is sort of a twilight zone that she talks about in her book, is what she occupies. So she sits in between a very interesting space in today's social science, one that of linguistics, history, and looking into societies and the social aspect of the society from the past. Now, before I begin, so one of the most important questions that have been thrown in the last few decades by the historian Romila Thapar is that if we want to understand the early history of South Asian continent, it can't be done alone from the historical method. She clearly emphasized that linguistics, anthropology, archaeology, and genetic sciences, the evidences from these have to be read together to understand the history of the early Indian society and also the early India as well. Now, it is from this perspective that I have read your book. So I read your book from this sort of a call that Romila Thapar establishes as early as 2002 in her early Indians, and also in 2005, where she works with another wonderful linguist on the same, who also Peggy should know well, Witzel, to bring out who are the Aryans. So even in that book, she clearly states that if we want to unlock the road to the early India, it has to be through linguistics and other allied disciplines to history. So these have become allied disciplines to history. So Peggy's work has now turned the study of language from the study of language structures to cognitive ability of speaking. So how do you speak? So that's another major branch, to an object of history. So you have now conceptualized language as an object of history to interpret the societies of the past. So can you reflect a bit on this sort of a reconstruction of language that you have done?
Okay, I think for a very long time, people have been excited by what they see as the very surface details in languages that look alike. I can listen to Kannada or Malayalam, and from the Sanskrit words, I have an idea of where I'm going. These are often nouns. But there's a deeper level at which one can look, but that's not very easy to see because that is obscured by vocabulary not being the same. So how do I look at languages? Make the question more specific in that how did it come to be the way it is? How do I see this diverse subcontinent as less diverse than many others see it?
So, as you pointed out, people look at sounds and look at sound similarity, words and word similarity, and then try and build a theory on it to explain language for the language, for the sake of language itself. But you see those same words, the same sounds, and you recover the story of the little people, right? All throughout the book. So now in this, the language is an object to study this little people.
Oh yeah, it's a forensic tool because very often, like, genetics is a very blunt weapon in a way. It can't tell you very much about individual people. Archaeology tells us about metals and things like that. How do we find out what is the history of communities? And do we see patterns that repeat themselves and allow us to extrapolate from one to the other? And what one has seen throughout India's history is that from an early population, which is the first people out of Africa, coming via the southern route, which was men and women, not migrants. They were merely people spreading out. And they came to populate the area of the Indus Valley and continue on even all the way through the archipelago of Indonesia into Australia. We had that first settlement. But subsequent to that, we had a lot of other immigrations. And I can mention that there's one thing to consider. Either they came with political and military power or they did not. If they did not, they just came in and settled and we don't know much about them. We can recover it in genetics. But there were groups that came in. They were very often young men coming in waves, the first wave being, oh, we found this place and how do we not go extinct? Since they were almost always men, like definitely from the east they were men, the steppe people, to some extent, even the early Zagros farmers coming into India, into the Indus Valley, there was a pattern of their migrants being men and needing to somehow not go extinct by marrying local women. And we have seen this in lots of other parts of the world. This is the first stage of the process. So it's a two-stage process. What you find is the men are here. They bring in, because they have such power, a language that can spread, words that can spread, and they meet women who speak something that's older. And when you have these kinds of families, not just in India, I mean, we've seen it in the tribal Caribbean and so on, you have children who are born who first learn their mother's language, which is not the settler language. And around age 5, the age at which children go to school, some, maybe boys, maybe both, get acculturated into the language of their fathers. So there is an initial attempt where you have a hybrid generation, and they pick up not a very different version of the settler language. This is what I call a Prakrit. And that's where I think you like this book, because it gets into the idea, why do we see Prakrits in India and we don't talk of pigeons in India? Because you get a Prakrit because you have not only these early families where young children, and of course mothers to some extent, picked up the settler language with a lot of local color on it. We had men who were somewhat erudite in whatever way that time allowed. They may have been literate, they may have been seen themselves as scholars. They approached the settlers in many parts of India, in the Indus Valley, on the Malabar coast. Well, in the time of the British are not separate from this. This is another migration. And these people picked up the language as well as what you are hearing from me now. I'm speaking to you in a Prakrit. This is not British English. It's mainly different in terms of things like the accent, okay? But it's different in a few other very subtle things. I would say this is with me only because I will avoid the word have. which is not a concept in Indian languages. So it's not violating any English rules. It's just a little exotic to English ears, but it's a Prakrit. So nothing really shockingly different or hybrid yet. Then later on comes the second stage, which is the important one, where you get what I have been criticized for calling the little people, which is people who did not themselves meet the settlers, did not themselves intermarry with these men, but because of changes in the society with these new migrants who either set up empires or set up something that was working, the towns, cities, they came towards them with their own instincts, their early operating systems, and they took superficial vocabulary and a few other things, not much, but mostly vocabulary and a few items of grammar, blended it onto earlier operating systems, and created something that superficially looks a bit like the settler language, but less so than even the Prakrit. This, I've been told, I can call, it's a Creole. I'm from the Caribbean. We saw Creoles being made in real time. That's what gave me my instinct for here. So what that told me is that you have essentially a two-stranded process of evolution, where the more obvious one on the top is the vocabulary layer, which is spread because of whoever has political power. The men come in with power, and with new implements, new concepts, notions of administration, and we look at that. And the women provide what in Hindi we'd call the bunyad, the foundation. I often show a mosaic where you look at everything and say, what a nice image of an octopus or a dragon. But have you seen the concrete? The concrete is actually what's making it into something you could walk on. So a good way of explaining this is like if you look at me, one layer of me looks totally European, because my mother is Canadian. One even top layer is again a bonding with the Indian landscape, which is above. It's not even in my flesh, it's my clothing. Below that is my genetic code, which you cannot see. You cannot see the traits of my father that are also there, but they are very much there. So when we look at how languages are made in India, it's easy to say, oh, Malayalam has Sanskrit. Oh, Kannada has Sanskrit. We can follow it. Oh, this one looks like her mother. But there's more. And that more is what underpins and creates the living organism.
So, thank you, Peggy. So now you have explained to us about the English and how the Indian English is a Prakrit. Now that itself probably a lot to deal with for a lot of people. But I was surprised when you said people have some problems with the word little people. Okay, fine, we can use the word subaltern, whatever that people find agreeable. But can you talk about that subaltern or the little people here who made an impact on a language that is spoken in the city? That sounds very North Indian, but the impact is so evident that we can't ignore it. So can you talk about that story for us a bit?
It always happens that when I'm giving a talk, the landscape is a very important protagonist. When I was in Kozhikode, I was able to talk about things to do with that area. And here, Hyderabad is basically the best test case I've used of all my models, because you want something that came to life in historical time. We know about how the formation of the Bahmani sultanates came up. We don't know everything. We don't know what we need to know, which is like, what were the little people doing? How did they convert? How did they move, change their identities, become urban, etc.? But there's something about Hyderabad that tells us almost everything we need to know for the things we don't know about the much more remote past. Like, in around the 13th, 14th century, they had, again, settlers coming in, speaking what they called Urdu. I'm sure in those days, the word Urdu was not yet used. It was only used in the 1700s. But it was basically something similar to Dehlavi Hindi, right? They came in, but they were men. Very few women came later, a little later, and we know who some of these women are, they identify. But it's mostly men, and they married local people. So what you got is the first generation of, and some of them left literature. So that one has to go through the literature to see how much of it is totally a northern person settling here, and how much is actually written from here in early Dakhini. Or Dakhni, they called it then, because they have different names. Each community is Dakhni, Dakhini, Dakhani, which tell you a lot about the people who spoke these languages. So you have the first stage visible there, that there are the families, the Mulkis, the Ashrafis, who know that they are descended from the first settlers and their children. They would have been a little bit separate from all the little people who came probably with Telugu ancestry, Telugu operating systems, and moved into the towns and started adopting the words from Urdu, but not necessarily adopting the entire language package. And of course, there's geography. This is the exact part of India where the Twilight Zone begins, where we are okay with gender, but we're not okay with ergativity. So how many of you here know Dakhini or Hyderabadis? So shall I tell you a joke which will illustrate the whole thing? Apparently there was a North Indian man who came, and he asked a local Hyderabadi man, "Aapne namaz padhi?" Now, you know, namaz has to agree with padhi in Urdu, because in the past tense, verbs agree with objects, not with subjects. So, aapne namaz padhi. And this Hyderabadi man was ferocious. You know, he's looking at me, he's seeing a man. Can't he tell that I'm a man? And he's saying padhi. So he said, "Tu padhi ki nai ke aapan ta pad liya." And this tells you, this is the Twilight Zone. Something ends here, and this is where the South begins, in a kind of not in a sharp, jagged line, because gender didn't end. Gender remained, but not the total North Indian gender. Hyderabadi Urdu has agreement between nouns and adjectives, but a woman will come up to you and say, "Main ja raha hoon," which is Dravidian gender, because I and you don't have gender, whereas he, she, and it will, or he and she will have gender. So you're getting a sense of a mixture of modes where even the Ashrafis, even the Mulkis who came in with the settlers have adopted what, or the subordinate clauses, something, 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 bolke. Now that is Telugu, that is not Urdu. You know, so you're seeing an operating system being repurposed with new words from the north, and I find it extremely exciting. If only history had allowed it to continue, because languages like Dakhini evolve on their own without governments pushing them, and solve and create sealant over gaps. This is a cement going in between all the cracks and creating communication. So so we have no idea how the original Dravidians came. I firmly believe that the Indus Valley, pre-Sanskrit era, they would, in many Proto-Dravidians, and they would have come south. When they came south, there's no historical record, but there's one thing we do have, the experience of Dakhini. It seems so similar. Could it be that, again, men came first, married locals, women came later, and therefore you can say, "Tu padi ki nai ke," because by the time more people came from the Indus Valley, there was a new frontier Dravidian. And so it's exciting. You can see I've mashed history, some genetics, I've mashed Creole theory, and come up with something that seems to work, because it explains something that we can all see before our eyes, which is Dakhini. So Hyderabad, this is where the theory is tested, and it seems to work.
So carrying this theory forward, so from Dakhini, can we go a bit back into the, let's say, the Himalayan region, and see how people and language would interact. So these are interactions, right? Up into the Himalayas.
There's a whole, there are different stories of the Himalayas. And when you go into places like the Pakistani Karakoram area, you have languages like Burushaski, which we're told are isolates. They don't look, they resemble nothing on earth. Why do they have Dravidian gender systems? Who were these men who came in? And who were the women available to them to marry? And did these women, being Indus Valley Proto-Dravidians, did they infuse a notion that is very, very basic to the subcontinent, that whenever gender re-emerges in a language, it reemerges in the Dravidian mold? And it's crazy. So here is an isolate which follows grammatical norms that tell us a bit about the Indus Valley and how it might have been there. Then we go further and we see, okay, Nepal. Nepal is crazily similar, but it's not the same people. That when the Kaskura speakers came in from the Garhwal area into Nepal, who did they meet? They didn't meet Dravidians, they didn't meet Austroasiatics, they did not meet First Indian tribal. They met Himalayan tribals, the Newari people. And the exact same thing happened where you found new languages coming up, modern Nepali coming up, and adopting the norms of Newari, which created a product so similar that we think of Nepali as being similar to a North Indian Indo-Aryan language. But yet its entire history is different. And again, Assamese, we think Assamese is part of the Magadhan crowd, but Bodo was very much there in its origin. Why do these two languages have this ergativity, the Tuparikinaike, the opposite of that? Why do they have it? They don't have it because of the Indus Valley. They have it from a very separate source. And the rules, the grammatical rules in Assamese and Nepali are not the same as the rules in Hindi and Urdu. So we're seeing, but we're seeing continuities, the same process, the same thing of men coming in, marrying locals, modern languages coming up because of the participation of little people. And that is so hard to document because history never mentions the little people. It always talks about kings and emperors and things like that, which is sad.
The monuments carry the kings,
Yeah.
the Nawabs, and the sultans. But we often see the little people leaving the mark in the everyday language that we speak. So now, can you descend a bit down from the Himalayas to the Great Gangetic Plains, on the both sides of Ganga Yamuna belt, and see how things emerge? So we are also slightly going a bit back into the past.
All right, now let's go back to Ashoka. In my classroom in Ashoka, I remember one student of mine, and I'll always think he's a wonderful creature, because he just said to me, hey, we were looking at the Ashokan inscriptions, and Magadhan, Magadha Prakrit. And he looked at it and saw something I didn't see because I'm trained, you know, that all the Prakrits look a bit alike, and therefore, and he said, hey, this does not look Magadhan. It's called Magadhan Prakrit. I said, yeah, but he said, no, it doesn't. And then he said, what did he think? He was writing a blog. And so Ashoka is the first Indian blogger. But then I dug into it deeper and discovered that even in Ashoka's era, all the kings and, but Buddha was also from a Kshatriya background, Mahavira, all these people, even east of the confluence, they had a wish to appeal to the West. So the Pali is written as though it's appealing to a Western order, west of the confluence order. And I was carrying it in my head. I'm from that part of India. So I've grown up with this as a duality, that are we from the West or are we from the East? And I was staying at a guest house at giving physics and maths institute there. And all the professors were speaking to me in Western proper Hindi or English. And all the people in the helping out in the guest house was speaking to me in genderless. They thought it was Hindi. And like they come to me and say, "Tu bahut acha Hindi bolta hai." And I was upset. I thought they were talking baby talk. And then I suddenly realized, no, they are Bhojpuri speakers trying to speak Hindi. They don't have gender. So even to the modern era, what was there in the Ashokan time, that the kings, the professors, spoke to the West. And the little people spoke something much more in line with Bengali, which is changing now. My family left that area 100 years ago. We were much more similar to Bengali at that time. So you're getting the sense that while the words came into the modern languages, into the tribal languages from Magadhan Prakrit, the structure did not. You will never go through any Magadhan text and see Ekjon, Ekta, any Bengalis in the audience who know what I'm talking about. You will not see it. You should see it in the first stone inscription. You know, that when he talks about one peacock or one deer and two peacocks, that should have had a t or t. It was not there. And yet it's there in the tribal languages, it's there in the modern languages. A whole migration that came from the Vietnam area 4,000 years ago remained there but never was manifested in the Prakrits. Because Ashoka, of course, he was a Kshatriya. There's no way he would, my grandmother would deliberately not use these features. We don't speak like the little people. I had to learn it on my own. So you get a sense of many layers, and that what we now call Magadhan is quite different from Magadhan Prakrit because it's the little people's language. The 12th century in South Asia was about a reassertion by the little people, which I was very happy about. Some things can happen without the government.
Now, so since you sort of spoke about reassertion, now there is also a form of a resistance that speakers put up to those major dominant languages, right? This is like the small people resisting to these major dominant forces. And I see in the book one such resistance emerging in the West Indo-Aryan languages, where what is once a very beautiful conjugation structure that most people, I'm from Tamil Nadu, so I never mugged it up, but most people in the north of India must have learnt it as grammar, but we don't see this in any of our
What are you talking
ergativity and the loss of verbal conjugation.
They don't know. You will not see it in a Hindi class. They'll tell you the opposite, and then everybody will come out speaking using ergativity. Okay, since some of you are Hyderabadis, you'll know what crazy stuff I'm talking about now, and many of you are northerners too. That in the past tense, maine khana khaya, by me food eaten, but it's not passive, it's ergative. There are no subjects in sentences. In earliest Indus Valley, in some of the languages still spoken in the Karakorams, in the Andamans, in Australian Aboriginal languages, there are no subjects. It is always by me. Like in the Karakorams in Shirna, you will say, buy me tea drink. You cannot say I drink, and it's in all the tenses. So, and in the Andamans, all the tenses. Something happened at the time that Sanskrit emerged and the Prakrits came up, and people wanted to continue saying, buy me tea drink, buy me food eat, but it did not conform to a Paninian grammar. And Prakrits also had to obey Paninian rules. So what could they do? They dug and they thought and they found the passive. So could we use a passive and not conjugate? South Asia is a verb hostile area. Can we simplify verbs? We want to knock the verbs out. You read a tract in Malayalam, the first sentence doesn't have a verb at all. And you think it's the heading. It's not the heading. It's a sentence that doesn't have to have a verb. So what happened is that people wanted to get this idea of buy me food eat, but Sanskrit would not allow it. Prakrit would not allow it. But you could have the word eaten. Eaten brings in the passive, without it being a passive, because it's not inflected like a passive in Sanskrit. It's just eaten without the is eaten. So suddenly it's by me food eaten. Now obviously, the food is eaten, I'm not eaten. And you get this, there's somewhere in southern Maharashtra where you can say, ladke khaye, khana khaye. And a northern Maharashtrian was, did somebody eat the kids? No. So this ergativity got into the language. It can only be rationalized in the past tense. So to this day, Marathi, I think Konkani to some extent, all the Hindis, I hate to use that term, all the way to the confluence, all of Pakistan, not Brahui. So Brahui is a different story. Let's not say it because my friends in Baluchistan will stop talking to me. All the way into the Pathan area, up into the Karakorams. Karakorams is all the tenses. You still have this idea that main ne khana khaya, or maybe not with me. It's usne khana khaya, that there is no subject, and that the past tense, the verb agrees with the object. And we all do it, but nobody teaches it in a classroom. And it's like it slips over their heads. And kids just grow up knowing that in the past tense, the verb agrees with the object, except in Hyderabad.
So is this a form of a resistance that people put out to a sort of a very dominating force, both in forms of language and in forms of other expressions of resistance?
But I would say in the North, it is a means of adapting an older Proto-Dravidian thing, which did not survive in the South. There is something odd about the Indian landscape, where it's not only in Dravidian space, but in other tribal space, like in Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh. The northern languages preserve importance of objects on verbs to be marked. You know, you can't just say, I eat. What you eat also has to come as a suffix on the verb or a prefix. But there is a place, it's a geographical place below which in the South it stops. And it's not only with Dravidian languages, it's with all languages. So I don't understand why that happened. It could be, and if it's so, even in the East, imagine the Indus Valley men going south, meeting early Indians there, who didn't like ergativity at all, and just as in Hyderabad much later, they knocked it out. So it's geographical more than resistance, because even its existence in this strange form, what's it called, split ergativity only in the past tense, it's an attempt to absorb and come to terms with the rules of Sanskrit and Prakrit without giving up on a concept that you have, that sentences don't have subjects. Basque also, sentences do exactly the same. Something about the early migrations out of Africa seem to have this, places in the Caucasus also, that sentences don't have subjects.
So, Peggy, you have, so in this short 30 minutes, you have taken us from, let's say, 17th century here in Dakkini, all the way to early 12th, 8th century Delhi and other regions. Now, a bit back further into this, it gets a bit difficult to understand how languages were, how people were. But you try and reconstruct what the IVC language, the features of the IVC language would have been. Now, we are progressing back further in the South. Until now, you have given actual examples of languages, right, all across. But now you have further gone back. Unfortunately, the IVC seals couldn't be interpreted at all till today.
I don't even know if they were language. I mean, I come from a family like that. If you are a goldsmith, you hallmark. Are they hallmarks? Are they early QR codes? I don't know.
So then, but what you do talk of structures based on all these forms of comparison, that these were the structures of the so-called IVC people or the little people, right? So can you talk a bit about that structure, that the word you use is the X-ray, the skeleton?
Yeah. You see, if you were to dig up a grave that's approximately 3,000 years old, let's say 3,500 years old, you would not expect to see the clothes or the flesh, but you would see the bones. Very often, you could even extract the DNA if you're very lucky, but what you will definitely not see is the flesh. We could try to imagine from existing South Indian languages what the words would have been like. And I think that the best candidates are the pronouns and the numbers, which are alike across the Dravidian languages. However, what are the things in modern Indian languages of the North that do not have anything to do with Sanskrit? Well, my professor Madhav Deshpande wrote a lot on how did ter, der, ner, la come into the, well, la did not come into Sanskrit, came into Prakrit. How did ter, der, ner come? And he talks of a 700-year gap where the Brahmins were pretty much left to live in their shakhas out isolated, and many did not even understand what they were reciting. And then there was an initiative in the time of the Kuru dynasty, go and collect these hymns. And by then they were not all the same. There were many similar hymns, but pronounced in different ways. And what I would call early linguistics grad students, 1000 BCE, they sat in the evenings and hashed out, I heard a t, no, I heard a th. And they sometimes actually suppressed what they had heard because it didn't make sense in terms of grammatical structure. So by the time we had a Samhita of the Rig Veda, 700 years had passed, and in that time leaked into the recitation of Sanskrit, and definitely all the Prakrits in the area, which were the normal living languages, was the ter, der, and they had na and sha, which you don't get in the south, but you get it up in the far northwest, Pashto, Sindhi, and the Karakoram area. So you had these things slipping in. You have names like Usha, which are obviously violating all the grammar rules of Sanskrit, so they are old. There is Mani, that is violating. It's a Dravidian Sandhi rule. It's not a Sanskrit Sandhi rule. Sanskrit allows na only if it has a ra or ri in the word, like Ramana can be said. But you would not say Marnik, because Marnik is from an old, and it's a Dravidian rule, because in between two vowels, na becomes na, which is still a rule in Punjabi, by the way. So Harappa was Dravidian territory in many ways. So where was I going with all of that? So we're trying to extrapolate back. The easiest thing to see is the sounds, but you have there are a lot of other things. Sanskrit, apart from it having things like the karaks, the cases, and it had a huge verb morphology. We don't get that in modern Indian languages, but we do get one thing that is not at all in Sanskrit, which is verbs having a gender marking. Now, gender marking is a totally Dravidian thing, and that too only in the third person. He, she, it eats will have a gender marker. In Tamil, if it's only two genders, it'll have a gender marker. This is not from Sanskrit, but it is all over. And Hindi, languages like Hindi had to do things like turn their verbs into nouns or into participles, like khaya is not a verb, it's a participle. It's not a finite verb. Main khati hoon means I am a khati. It's a noun. Main khata hoon. How many people know about the Hindu undivided family laws? Who is the karta? What's a karta? A karta is a noun. It is the administrator of the family lands. So I am a karta. Main karta hoon. And you can be a male karta or a female karta. So this does not come from Sanskrit, the idea that verbs are going to take gender marking. There are other things I cannot prove so well because the Karakorams it doesn't give me enough data, like they fall off the map with it. Okay, from Hindi, hua hai or hua ho gaya. Now this is a very Asiatic concept. Chinese is full of it. Whether something happened completely, definitely, or didn't happen, tense does not even matter to Chinese. But here we have hua ho gaya. It's not Sanskrit. There's nothing even remotely like it. in Sanskrit. So we have an idea of people needing to push in familiar, and some of the things like the ergativity came up in Iran for a good 1,000 years and it disappeared again. So the idea is that things from the earlier landscape, there was a species of Dravidian that thought this was the way to do things, which is different from what they became when they went south, though this is probably the biggest thing that changed. So you get a sense of, I'm seeing I feel like I'm a little dog walking around sniffing things you can't sniff until I tell you that they're there, and then you can probably sense them. But once walking through history and language is telling me so much about our past, I'm trying to guess at where the gaps are, hallucinate, as the AI model would say, to figure out how did these people move south. And that's the open start. There's no evidence.
Yes, so with this sort of a journey through the past, now I open the floor to the audience. So,
can somebody get him a mic?
You're saying there's some relationship between
yeah.
Australian languages and Indian language. What does that tell us about the interrelationships of these peoples?
There is a certain amount of genetic study, and probably coming out of Australia, where they actually have assessed the time depths. When did the first Australians reach Australia? So they're saying things like 65 to 60,000 years, more like 60 because people came here in 65,000 years, left Africa 70,000 years. It was not a migration, it was a spreading out. Because that is why, for example, women came. Because women didn't come with forays and expeditions, but women came in larger spreading of population. I think the people who have looked at, well, genetically we have found certain markers in our tribes and Australian First People, which are unique to both. I mean, they're the only people in the world. I'm sure they've not looked at the rest of us because they don't think that us mutant mutts also contain all the same genes. But I think people have looked in the wrong way at Australian languages in comparing them with us. They're looking at the superficial things. We don't share words, no. But Australian languages have multiple gender systems. So do we. The old languages in the Karakorams have 4. Marathi has 3, Hindi has 2. There was a time when the Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand area had at least 2, but then they had a migration from Southeast Asia and lots of things changed. The Andamans have 7. Australian languages have between 2 and 8. And then this ergativity thing that I describe, buy me food, eat, is throughout the Australian languages. And Indians are known to sit in Australia in cafes and hear somebody going, and looked around, maybe I'll meet a Malayali or a Tamil speaker. And it's a first Australian. And since they don't know that we exist, and we are part of the pattern, as what you were going to call the arc of migration, they don't know. They actually sit and do things like ultrasounds of their mouths when they talk for these strange, we say ta, we say da, we say la, we say na, and don't know that there's some of us who also do it. I would love to actually get in touch with those languages because this is not what's written. One has to actually go digging in weird places for reports on Australian languages because people are not looking for it. And in fact, so I decided to go the other way. If I could find it in Australia and a bit in New Guinea, and definitely the Andamans, could I find it in Africa? And to be sure, there are dialects in Ethiopia where you get turda, you get some strange extra marking of objects onto verbs. Verbs double marking object and subject is throughout Australia. In fact, we would look to Australia to see what we would have been if we hadn't had all the other migrations.
Peggy, as always, you've set the ball on rolling, the room on fire, everything. Thank you for your moderation too. And I wanted to ask you a out of the hall question. If India didn't have linguistic states, do you think we would have hung together as a country for 70 years and more?
See, 70 years is quite late in our history. What I'm now trying to think of is not following the Western model, but looking at the Chinese model. The Chinese model separates written from oral. So oral, yes, we would do a lot of things. Dakhini would emerge, Dakhini would spread, Nagamese would come into existence in the northeast, variants of Nepali. We are getting, I keep referring to our languages, Hindi more than the others, but all these others too, as shape-shifting languages. However, this is 2026. We can't allow that to bring in uncertainty, that this is an age of tech. I want to see the 80% who don't read English, or maybe it's 90%, be able to access every bit of information. So that means translation. We have to have the written mode perfectly clear, so that there's no question that South Indian children are made to learn Hindi. They can speak it in the playground if they want to, if they feel that it does something for them. There's no pressure on that. But they should be able to just, with the press of a button, and we're talking about this now, get something in tech, in administration, in science textbooks, modern sector, which would immediately output the Assamese into Tamil, or output the Marathi into Odia. And that way, English is not bypassed so much as brought in on the side. English is harder we're in a room called the grid. I refer to this as the Indian grid. This is the grid where if you line up Indian languages from even Santali, which is not Indo-Aryan, Indo-anything, Indo-European, you get complete matches almost top down, where the word orders, what can be deleted, what needs to be marked. So to write that into an AI algorithm is not a very big problem. And so written space needs to be precise, and we need the diversity, because I can't speak for 200 years from now, but we need the diversity maintained in this space. What happens in the wild jungle of orality, let it be. I don't want to get into that, though I think this is where we diverge, because he thinks that's important too. Can you give her?
As a Bengali, having lived in Hyderabad now for 60 years, I still know Bangla well, not only to speak but read and write, everything. Now our spoken Bengali is quite different from what we write.
Yes.
And those who don't know Bengali, they many a times think that it is Sanskrit,
Yes.
but it isn't.
Yeah.
It is Bangla, but a written Bangla is
Shadu
different
Bhasha.
from what we speak.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say that, because that there's a wrong concept, idea about the written Bangla, which is taken as Sanskrit.
Yeah,
Thank you.
It is a sort of thing that we call diglossia, that you have a different written mode and you have a different spoken mode. But there is a further problem in this, and now I'm moving ahead into the future, into my next book, which is being edited by someone in this room right now. I think he's still here. Yes, he is. What was I talking about?
Language in the future.
Yes, diglossia. Now wait, I am a very old person. I tend to forget things. But that, what you find is that a lot of what is the Shadu Bhasha, or the Sanskritized Hindi, Sanskritized Malayalam, the tech that is written in our languages is, I would call, almost compromised data, because a lot of these Sanskritized varieties were evolved to translate outer English texts. Like when you read Sanskritized Hindi, you almost couldn't imagine the English text that was on the side that it's translated from. So it has the very Latinized, Sanskritized endings of technical English. So is that Indian? Is it a compromised LLM? Now we're going into AI space. Can we trust it? We do have varieties of Indian languages which have not got through that. There's certain kinds of Malayalam which have avoided. Like Jewish Malayalam is known to be a little bit older. We have Urdu has not played this game of catch up with English. So where are we going? There are a lot of questions that we have been derailed in many ways, that every single thing the techies are trying to translate for their AI models is translated out of English. There is something wrong with that. And what do we do when I don't know? We have to start writing original texts in our languages.
With that one last question from the audience here.
Yeah, so I'm a population genetics researcher, and I think my field could use a lot more linguists. So I was just wondering, we have two other major linguistic groups in India, right? The Tibeto-Burman and Austroasiatic groups.
I have a problem with the term Austroasiatic because that's only on the Y-DNA side.
Right.
The mtDNA markers are all first Indian, right?
Right. But their existence in India and their migratory patterns have kind of been a bit of a missing link. Like they have also been attributes to Polynesian origins, because you also have Austronesian groups and things like that. So what's your take on how do we study these kind of patterns through migration and languages?
Well, I think the whole thing that we call Austroasiatic is, again, part of the same phenomenon. It was geneticists who uncovered that indeed it was not only our rice, but also our humans that had a migration from the Vietnam and Burma area exactly 4,000 years ago. So many things happened in India 4,000 years ago and in the 12th century. But how do we study it? One thing I would like to say is nobody would dare to say that Swahili is an Semitic Arabic language because of its vocabulary. But that's exactly the same way in which our tribal languages of Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh and Bengal have Austroasiatic words. So why are we, this is something that Grierson, Max Muller, these people came up with, and we haven't had the courage to say that if Swahili is a Bantu language, isn't Mundari, Santali, aren't these peoples as much first Indian as they are Austroasiatic? In fact, the migration was not, we wouldn't know about it if it weren't for people like you. It is just completely lost in history. So I don't like the use of that term. And similarly, Indo-Aryan for the north and Dravidian for the south, because of the most superficial thing that melts away in the grave first. In fact, there's a continuum across all of India, and a certain amount of mix of what we would call Dravidian heritage, but not in the Andamans because it's pre-Dravidian. So, but we need you people because we need you as a sort of like a compass to see where we are going. And if what we're saying doesn't match with what you're saying, we need to think again.
So today's discussion, sorry, we are out of time. Today's discussion was meant as a compass to the book. I hope if those of you who have not read it, please do read it. It's an exciting journey into let's say 4,000 years and beyond. So thank you, Peggy. Thank you, Giri.